usually starts with a tree. This tree. When the leaves on this red maple start to turn, journalists are compelled to start spreading the news that the budget tree is preparing for the second Tuesday in May. That's usually when the budget is held, also known as Political Nerd Christmas, and marks the 6 hours a year Twitter is spared the thoughts and feelings of the nation's parliamentary press gallery. Why? Because we're locked up, without phones or internet access or Twitter poring over this, the budget. And we're not freed until the Treasurer takes to the floor of the Parliament to deliver their budget speech. So what exactly happens in a lockup? First of all, we are in a sense actually locked up. Once the clock hits 1:30, officials from Treasury have each registered journalist sign a legal form declaring they won't communicate any of the information in the budget papers until the embargo lifts at around 7:30 that night. They're pretty serious about it, but yes, you can go to the bathroom. Once the form is signed, you hand over your phone for the duration of the lockup. Each organisation is responsible for disconnecting the internet, although an intranet, with approval, is allowed to be set up so journalists in Canberra can send copy to production teams who are also locked up. It's a fairly big operation, and Treasury takes it very seriously. Officials sit with the locked up journalists and come round and check to make sure the internet and communication ban remains in place. That includes if you are making content for social media. SIM cards must be removed from phones and you have to have pre-approval, and a Treasury official will watch you do it. Nothing like an audience to put you at ease. Traditionally, the budget lockup was so none of the information in the budget could leak out ahead of time and influence financial markets. These days, it's still a little bit about that, but it's also a way of ensuring the government gets a lot of bang for its buck. Budget stories aren't exactly the most exciting, but the theatre of lockup and the big release at the end tends to ensure it gets plenty of attention. Think of it as an open book exam. With no internet, journalists have to rely on their knowledge and what they have thought to take into the room with them. Previous stories and past budgets are an absolute must. It's also the one time of year journalists actually have access to Treasury officials and the people who are responsible for carrying out the government's fiscal policy. Treasury boffins are made available to answer questions about particular policies or line items. It's treated as background information, but it is one of the only times you can actually clarify and question what's in the budget with the people who have helped create it. And then there is the Treasurer. They spend most of the budget walking around with their staff. Each bureau gets a short visit and a chance to ask some off-the-record questions about direction or why something is in or out. After a few hours with the papers, the Treasurer holds a press conference where on-the-record questions are asked. And then it's all pulled together for the coverage that you see that goes live the moment the Treasurer steps up to the dispatch box in Parliament and says, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen."
We acknowledge country and we commit to a voice for First Nations people.
Then it's controlled chaos. There is the reaction of stakeholders and the states, more questions for the Treasurer and Prime Minister, interviews to hold and report on, and usually a few holes to plug. It all wraps up around 11 p.m. and then we're back at it from 6 a.m. the next morning when the Prime Minister and Treasurer spend the morning wandering from marquee to marquee on the Parliament lawns where the TV networks have set up their breakfast TV broadcasts. And yes, the budget tree usually features quite prominently in the coverage. It's probably the biggest celebrity of the whole shebang. Oh, and the other question we are usually asked, who pays for the food? We do. Media organisations each stump up the bill for whatever catering they put on. At The Guardian, it's usually sandwiches, chips and lollies. You need those carbs when trying to work through an entire government plan in 6 hours. The budget lockup is about finding the story within the numbers, the one outside the press releases and Treasurer's speech. What's not being told? What are they hiding? Governments consider a good budget to be one no one is talking about a week later. Ultimately, though, the only judge of whether the budget works or not is you.